All right, we're going to bring in Ulrich. Pronoun is he, from Mexico. Ulrich's a theist. Seashell fossils in the Alps prove Noah's flood. Ulrich, how you doing?
Okay.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
I remember when I was a child, they found a lot of seashell fossils in the Alps. And I've always thought that's because of Noah's flood. But let me hear what you think, how they came there.
Yeah, when
plate tectonics.
we want to answer your question. Yeah, we want to answer your question. But when I was a kid, when my mom was driving us to Utah I grew up in Las Vegas. When we drove from Las Vegas to Utah, there's a mountain pass you go through on I-15, and they basically carved through the mountains to get the freeway to go from one side of the range to the other. So you can actually see a lot of the geologic column in there, and you can see very clear lines going back and forth, back and forth. And my mom told me that's because of Noah's flood. When the waters were receding, it was causing these marks to appear on the mountains as the water was receding. And I accepted that as evidence of Noah's flood back when I was a kid. And actually, for a good part of my 20s, I still look back at that and say, yeah, that's evidence of Noah's flood. So Ulrich, why do you think that is not good evidence of Noah's flood, unless you think that is evidence of Noah's flood?
I think it is, yeah. So I want
you think the lines in canyons are from? You think the lines in against mountains are from Noah's flood?
Yes, from the overturning of basically the earth.
Okay. Do you think that maybe there's other explanations that can explain those lines?
I've been listening to your show, so you have your other explanations. But why are there seashells in the mountains in the Alps?
I know we're going to get to that. Yeah, Forrest has got that in the bag, but I just want to walk us through this first, okay? Because I want you to understand our perspective before we answer your question. What other explanations could there be for those lines?
It might be somebody doing that on purpose, bringing them there, having them brought there, and then schools find them. It's like, oh, it's all exciting, but yeah, the conspiracy.
So you think people go into the mountains to draw lines on the mountains for school field trips?
No, but you tell me what other explanations
have you ever heard of something called sedimentary deposits?
Yes.
We can see it happen. We can see it happening in real time right now with things like we can go out there. You can go out into geology right now and see sedimentary deposit live, real time happening. So that's another explanation for those lines. So we have three explanations on the table. We have from the flood. We have somebody ran out there and drew it before a school field trip showed up. Or we have sedimentary deposit, which we can acknowledge and see happening. Which of those is the best explanation?
But how did the sedimentary deposits happen? That be the question,
Weather.
Right?
Weather.
What caused it?
Stenos. Those are called Stenos laws.
Yeah. Weather and the earth, tectonic plates and erosion and all that works together.
It's going to be deposition and deposition.
Yeah, it grinds. It basically wears rocks into dust, and that dust settles elsewhere and resolidifies back into sedimentary rock.
But still, the Alps are very far away from the ocean. Even if all that stuff happens.
Ulrich, sorry, the thing that unites all of this, are you familiar with the concept of plate tectonics at all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard of it, but I wouldn't say I'm familiar with it, to explain it, no.
That's fine, yeah. So the crust of the Earth, you know what the crust of the Earth is, yeah?
Yes.
You know what I mean when I say that? Okay, cool. So the crust of the Earth is broken up into large units called plates that are basically, this is not exactly, but you can think of it as they're like islands floating on an ocean of magma. So the inside of the Earth is all molten, and then you've got these hard outer shell, this crust that's broken up into pieces that are all moving around on that outer surface. And this is something we can actually, around that inner ocean. And this is something we can actually measure and watch happening. It's very, very slow. It moves at about the rate that your fingernails grow. But we can test it. And so this is what causes not only continents moving, right? That's why the continents are in a different place now than they were several hundreds of millions of years ago. But also, it's one of the major things that drives up mountains. When two tectonic plates hit each other and run into each other, and they're both moving towards each other, well, all that earth can't just go nowhere, right? And they can't phase through each other like magic. And so usually one will subduct under the other, it'll get pulled down, or sometimes they'll press together and they'll bunch up. And this is where you get mountains being driven up by these two plates colliding and all of that earth crushing together. And so what happens is when you have an area that used to be an ocean, like the Alps, like the Andes, like the Himalayas, right? You get these places where these tectonic plates are colliding. This used to be the bottom of an ocean. And now all this earth is piling up and getting squished together and forming a mountain. Now you have rock that was on the ocean floor now being at the top of a mountain. And that is why we consistently, not just in the Alps, but like everywhere where there are mountains, we find marine fossils up at the top of those mountains all the time. We find a lot of clams and oysters and other brachiopods and bivalves. We find cryonoids. We find trilobites. We find fish. We find all sorts of marine fossils up at the top of mountains because of plate tectonics. And the reason why we know it's that and not because of some flood is because if it was the flood where mountains were, underwater by however many cubits, I forgot what it was, but like where these mountains were underwater and then the fish were on top of the mountains, then those fossils would be younger than the rocks that they're embedded in. But that isn't the case. When we test the dates of the fossils and also the rocks and everything around that area, they're all the same because that's where those things came from. Does that make sense, Ulrich?
Yes. Yeah. So
cool.
And
similarly, that is where when Eric is talking about these striations, these lines in the sides of mountains, that's because of what we call Steno's laws of superpositioning, which sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but it is the foundation of our understanding of geology and especially geological time. It's simply that different, as Eric was saying, the earth that is above water gets weathered and eroded, and dust and sand and stuff gets blown all over the planet and it deposits. And so all the time, the lower part of the crust is being pulled down into the mantle, and then it gets spewed up in volcanoes and vents and all these other things. But the top is being constantly added to. This dust is settling and forming new sedimentary rock. And so when we look at rock layers, right, we see these different layers in what we call strata in the rocks. You go to the Grand Canyon and you see all these bands of different colors throughout the rock. Steno's laws are simply saying that the layers on top are the youngest and the layers on the bottom are the oldest, and that the layers are continuous across the whole landscape. So if you can find this layer with this chemical signature, it's going to be the same across the whole way. And if you find a layer that's intruding, that's cutting through several different layers, that is the youngest of all, because that's the only way that logically makes sense. And so when we look at mountains and things, like Eric was talking about, you're driving through the mountains, you see these lines, what you're seeing are layer after layer after layer after layer of deposition of different ages of the earth that have been laid down. And then something cuts through it. Either people cut through it to build a road, or erosion cuts through it with a water channel, or something, whatever it may be. Usually you get a small fracture, and then years of rain and fluid makes it bigger and bigger and bigger. That's how the Grand Canyon came along. And so that's what we're seeing. It's not that somebody went and just dumped a bunch of fossils up there for fun. It's not that somebody carved these lines into the sides of the mountain. It just takes time, and these things happen naturally. And you can see this in both laboratory and field experiments. You can literally do small scale experiments demonstrating this.
So Ulrich, we just showed.
Does all that clack?
Go ahead, Ulrich.
Yes. So can Noah's flood be disproven? Be the next question.
Yes,
very yes. So. 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like us to do that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so let's just logic our way through it really quick. Noah's flood, the entire earth is completely covered in water. Where did all of that water come from, and where did all of it go afterwards?
The Bible says it was within the earth before, and then these chambers, the underground chambers, open, and that's where the water came from. Also from above,
Right.
of course.
Sure. Do we have any evidence of great deals of water in the center of the Earth or hanging out in the sky? Anything like that?
We have this line between the American and European continents. I once heard something about that.
Yeah, that's the transatlantic ridge where we can actually see, when I was talking about plate tectonics, that's a great place to see it, is in that transatlantic ridge. We can actually see the tectonic plates spreading, and we can do radiometric dating on the ocean floor to test the dates of these rocks. And sure enough, the farther away we get from that ridge, the older and older and older dates we get, because that's what would logically make sense. Let's try a different thing, just for funsies. Supposedly all plants were on, the entire Earth was underwater for a year, if I remember correctly. It was a little over a year that the flood lasted. So how do you suppose all these plants lived under salt water for a year?
Some of them were like floating. I mean, I haven't really thought about it, but I think that there are plants that are able to float, right?
I mean, some maybe, but like the fact is that we have a bristlecone pine tree that's like older than this flood was supposed to be. So like that guy didn't float.
And even if they could float, the salt water would kill them just about immediately.
Yeah,
because those plants
exactly
they don't jive well with salt water.
There's also things like coral reefs, which are ecosystems that need to be, generally, there are some deep water ones, but like coral reefs need to be in shallow water. They rely on photosynthesis just like a plant does. And so if the entire Earth is underwater, how did all the corals survive? Also, corals are animals. So did Noah bring coral on the ark? And if so, how did that work?
I mean, explanation that I'm thinking of, that I'm not totally denying evolution. So I think after the flood, evolution has happened, and so some new species started to exist.
Okay. Do you believe in the concept of kinds then? That Noah didn't have to bring every single possible species of animal. He just needed like one of, say, the elephant kind.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so the reason why I said elephants there is because it's a great, you can watch my last YouTube video where I actually show the math on this, or you can watch, I believe Erica Guts Gibbon also talked about this before. Like what we call the generation time for elephants, which a generation time for a species is the amount of time that it takes for them from birth to become sexually mature and then also gestate offspring and then produce new offspring. So like that entire time there, with the average generation time of elephants, looking at the timeline, the biblical timeline since the flood as answers in Genesis, one of the most well-known, Bible realist organizations in the world, say for elephants alone, just as an example, every single elephant born since the flood would need to be a completely different species with different features, different skull shape, different tusk style, like everything, completely different species than its mother, which was a completely different species than its grandmother, all the way up till today when suddenly they just stagnate and become just African and Asian elephants. That's what would be required for us to have the species diversity that we see in the fossil record since the time that the flood supposedly happened. Does that make any sense for that to be the case?
Yes, but for example, let's take dogs and wolves and all of that. That can happen within like 6,000 years, right? Like we can have a differentiation between dogs and wolves.
Sure, because dogs and wolves can breed after a couple of years, maybe, and they have a pretty short gestation. Elephants, that's not going to work that way. Elephants take a very long time to get sexual maturity, and they gestate their young for like a couple of years, if I remember correctly. Let me just double check my numbers here. Elephant sexual maturity age is between 14 and 17 years old. So you need this thing to be at least 14 years before you can breed another elephant. And then also gestation period is 22 months. So almost 2 years. So it takes about at the minimum, it takes about 16 years to make one new elephant, right? So it's not like a dog where we can crank out new breeds every couple of years, just by selective breeding. And again, this is just one example. We can move on to another one if this doesn't work.
I want to jump onto that, add another item on that dog pile about disproving the flood. Gutsy Gibbon talks about this at length, and it's called the heat problem. That much water with that much pressure on the earth, that much radioactive decay, that much tectonic activity, if you buy into that part of the Noah myth, or the flood myth rather, where the continents are moving so rapidly because of the water, the amount of heat that is generated by such an event would basically turn the earth into a star. It is way too much to radiate out naturally and safely. So just that itself, just the heat that would be generated from that much water doing what it supposedly did, according to flood myths pushers, it's impossible. We would not be here. Life would not be here. We would still be a molten ball of rock floating through space if that was the case. Okay. So Ulrich, we've gone through 5 things now. So we talked about, you brought up seashells on top of mountains. I think it was the Himalayas or something. I talked about lines going through canyons. Alps, I'm sorry. Seashells up on the Alps. I talked about lines through the Rocky Mountains in Utah. We talked about, where does the water go? And you said, well, we have a big rift, a big ravine down in the ocean. It probably drained down there, kind of like a big toilet. We've talked about animals evolving and having to evolve at such a rapid rate after the flood. That makes that impractical. And now we are also talking about the heat problem. 5 things that you can look at and go, well, the flood explains it this way, or the flood explains it that way. And when it comes down to the heat problem, the only answer is God magicked it so that we didn't have this problem. Yeah. God had the flood and did it in a way where where he just waved his wand and made the heat go away, and it wouldn't be a problem. The problem with those explanations, and the problem with the explanations that, and not the problem, the good thing about the explanations that we are raising, is that the explanations that support the flood are all ad hoc, unsupported, and all you guys can do is just point to an old book to say that this happened, while all the things that we explain are natural events that we can observe right now. We have tons of people studying these things right now. We can support this with evidence and observation and reason and logic and science. And there's a reason why science keeps on growing and progressing with this method, and the Bible doesn't get us anywhere useful. And that's because science is analyzing things and saying, we don't know the explanation to this phenomenon we see. Let's investigate. And the conclusions of everything we just brought up, the conclusions of evolution, the conclusions of the theory the conclusions of evolution, the theories of geology, all those things, all developed after these observations occurred. Whereas flood pushers are starting with their conclusion and trying to shoehorn the facts to fit that conclusion. So that's why we reject the flood. And I think we've also brought some really good reasons why the flood is just straight up falsified, not just rejected, but falsified. It could not happen. It did not happen.
We haven't even touched the surface on what could have been talked about there. There's a lot.
We took out some of the big stuff, but we could talk about this for hours and all that. And we also show that the explanations that science presents is supported. It is much, we have much higher confidence in the scientific conclusions because it's supported by evidence, reason, and logic rather than my book says so. So that's the divide between us. And that's kind of why at the beginning I was trying to bring up the lines thing, because I had hoped at least you would know about sedimentary deposit and erosion and how we see it happening right now. Hopefully you could have looked at that and go, oh, actually, no, the lines aren't from the flood. The lines are from this other thing. And then you can take that reasoning and logic and going, well, maybe I'm having a blind spot with these fossils on top of the Alps. Maybe the flood didn't do that. Maybe there's some other explanation, which Forrest presented with tectonic shift and the fact that the earth moves and changes. And fossils from millions of years ago can end up way high in the mountains as the earth just changes gradually over time.
I also just popped, if you're curious, like I make videos on my YouTube channel where I am making fun of these things and kind of having fun with like creationist, stuff. I just popped in the chat 2 videos that I did that they're gonna be silly and mocking. So like take them with that in mind. I'm not trying to, I don't want you to feel attacked when you watch them. But like the first one is called A Flood of Nonsense, and I have this whole section in there about just like questions about the flood that kind of don't make sense at all. Like, what's asking about why are fossil layers the way that they are? Where did the parasites live on the flood? There's like so many things like that. We talk about tectonics, we talk about spreading, and then the second one that I posted in there is called Ark Encounter. It's my review of a Eric Hovind movie about Noah's Ark, where I do the math about elephants and all that, and I show that in there, and it's just one of the many reasons why it just doesn't work. So if you want to check those out, I would encourage you to watch those things if you like.
I also encourage you to look into how the Egyptians were building pyramids both before and after the flood, and brewing beer throughout the whole time.
Right.
I presented that to a couple witnesses that came. Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door, and they're like, "Well, some people started the pyramids, and then the Egyptians showed up later, and it's like, oh, well, let's go ahead and resume this work." And it's just like it was just such an ad hoc thing. It's like, it's
a big enough flood to lay down all the tectonic layer, all the strata, all the layers, everything, but didn't cover the pyramids that were, whatever. And Ulrich, is any of this making sense? Like, are we missing anything? Do you feel like we've avoided a question or anything like that?
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'm going to think about it. Yeah.
Well, cool. Good. That's all I can ask.
That's all we want. Yeah, call us back if you have any further questions. I've enjoyed. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us and hear us out on all this, and just to ask good questions. Because if there's more stuff out there, if there's something that's interesting, we want to hear it.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good day.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
I wonder if he was named after Ulrich from Skyrim. Remember Ulrich? He's he's the first guy you meet when you wake up in the wagon. Oh, good. You're finally awake.
Yeah.
It's a meme. So I'm sorry. I'm
right.
I'm not your type of nerd. I'm a gaming nerd. You're one of those nerds.
I play some game when I have time. I actually just started a couple of months ago. I had a little bit of time, and I got to get back into Skyrim just a little bit. So it makes me smile to think about. I get to play like maybe a week of video games a year. And so I picked Skyrim for this time.
Oh, okay. Excellent choice. And I think I got that wrong. It wasn't Ulrich that greeted you when you woke up. Ulrich was gagged because he had the dragon.
Yeah, he has a voice.
It was the other guy. I don't know his name. But
also, it was Ulrich, wasn't it? Not Ulrich.
Ulrich.
You fucking.
Was it Ulrich? Fuck. Maybe
it's Ulrich. Ulrich Stormcloak. Shouted him to pieces.
My brain.
That guy.
Wow, I totally failed here. Let's move on. I'm just going to ignore this.
Just blew. Ulrich von Liechtenstein from A Knight's Tale, played by Heath Ledger, the cinematic masterpiece known as A Knight's Tale. Ulrich von Liechtenstein. That's what it was.
That's it. And I just heard static that whole time, so I'm just going to drop in this music.
Thanks for watching that clip. Hey, we're trying to do some data research about whether or not our callers successfully proved that God existed. If they didn't, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's how we know they failed. But if you don't like and subscribe, you're saying that they succeeded. So you're saying that by liking and subscribing, you will be affirming that you are an atheist. Hey, what else should they do?
I don't know. Maybe go to patreon.com/calltheline and donate some of their hard-earned money.
Like and subscribe.